China has officially imposed anti-dumping duties on stainless steel products from 30 countries, with the highest tax rate reaching an astonishing 103.1%, and these tariffs are set to remain in place for up to 5 years. This is not just a routine trade adjustment. It's a bold move and China's first major countermeasure publicly announced to the world in recent times. Curiously, the United States is not on the list of targeted countries, a detail that has sparked widespread speculation. The duties apply specifically to two categories of goods: stainless steel billets and hot-rolled coils, both widely traded commodities, especially in countries like the European Union, the United Kingdom, South Korea, and Indonesia, where economies heavily rely on exporting these materials. What's unusual here is that China, typically more passive in these matters, is now stepping forward with an aggressive defensive stance. This timing is significant, as it aligns with the final stages of sensitive tariff negotiations between various countries and the Trump administration. Many believe this is no coincidence, but a carefully calculated warning from China, signaling that it will no longer remain silent in the face of external economic pressure. The move also reflects just how much China's own steel industry has evolved. Back in 2018, global stainless steel production totaled 50.729 million tons, and China alone contributed 26 million tons, more than the combined output of Europe and the United States. Fast forward to 2024, and China's production had skyrocketed to 39.44 million tons, a 51.54% increase in just 6 years. Despite this impressive growth, not all of China's output meets the highest global standards. Certain products, like ultra-thin stainless steel foil and high-strength spring steel, still demand advanced smelting techniques and precision technologies that are largely controlled by traditional industrial powers, such as European nations and South Korea. As a result, China has continued importing specialized steel products to fill gaps in its domestic capabilities, with Europe being a major supplier. In 2018, Europe's total stainless steel production capacity was about 7.385 million tons, yet its exports to China were surprisingly low, under 100,000 tons. This was mainly due to cost. Stainless steel billets and hot-rolled plates produced in China were significantly cheaper, often by 800 yuan per ton. For Chinese manufacturers, the choice was clear: buy local. But for European firms, the price gap meant they couldn't compete effectively in China's market. And as China's industry continued to grow in scale and efficiency, European companies faced the real risk of being completely edged out. To fight back, they needed a new strategy. Starting in 2019, some European firms adopted a bold low-price approach to regain market share. They targeted China's price-sensitive lower-tier cities, places where cost often outweighs quality and branding, and began selling at sharply reduced prices. This wasn't just a race to the bottom. European companies paired their pricing strategy with unique product lines that balanced decent quality with affordability. The goal was to regain lost ground and expand reach throughout China. These efforts were further backed by European governments through research subsidies, tax breaks, and policy support, helping companies cut costs and operate more competitively in China. And it worked. In a short span, EU imported stainless steel became about 35% cheaper than Chinese equivalents, and Europe's market share in China nearly doubled, from 12% to 23%. But this success came at a price for China. Local manufacturers saw their profit margins slashed by over 5%, and many smaller players, already struggling with cost pressures, were forced to exit the market entirely. The situation escalated when South Korean firms entered the fray. Inspired by Europe's gains, they too adopted aggressive pricing to seize a slice of China's massive market. These companies heavily undercut Chinese producers, especially in the low-end segment, which only intensified the domestic industry's challenges. The consequences were severe. Some Chinese factories reduced their operating rates by 15%, and more than 20,000 jobs were lost across the supply chain. Soon after, Japan and India jumped into the competition, launching their own price-cutting campaigns, all aiming to increase their footprint in China's lucrative market. But while they focused on short-term gains, China was preparing a long-term response. After several rounds of investigations, Chinese regulators concluded that foreign companies were clearly dumping stainless steel into China, selling at unfairly low prices, disrupting the competitive balance, and destabilizing the domestic market. In July 2019, China responded forcefully. It announced anti-dumping duties on stainless steel billets and hot-rolled coils originating from the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia. The penalties were significant: 43% for the EU, 29% for Japan, 103% for South Korea, and 20% for Indonesia. The decision stunned many, especially those who had underestimated China's willingness to push back. It marked a turning point, a clear signal that China is no longer willing to accept being the passive player in global trade dynamics. This is a strategic, calculated step not just to protect its domestic industries, but to reshape its position in the global supply chain, and to remind the world that when pushed, it will push back. The measure was initially set to last 5 years, backed by supporting policies like price commitments. But Japan, from the outset, refused to accept the decision and ultimately took the matter to the World Trade Organization's dispute settlement mechanism. After rounds of investigations and legal proceedings, the WTO ruled against China, stating that the anti-dumping duties it had imposed didn't align with international trade rules. This outcome, however, wasn't entirely unexpected. At the time, the expert panels within the WTO were heavily influenced by European and American countries, which often leaned toward one side in disputes involving China and Japan. As a result, China found itself on the back foot in this round of trade friction. With Japan receiving international backing, other countries began to follow its lead. They increasingly turned to low-price strategies to aggressively enter and expand their presence in the Chinese market, hoping to gain rapid market share under the protective umbrella of WTO support. What they didn't anticipate, though, was China's next move. In July of this year, China responded with a fresh wave of countermeasures. It announced that, starting immediately, it would continue imposing anti-dumping duties on stainless steel-related imports from 30 countries for another 5 years. This list includes the United Kingdom, Indonesia, South Korea, and all 27 EU member states. What's different this time is the scope and uniformity of enforcement. All companies across the EU and the UK are now subject to a 43% anti-dumping tariff. Indonesian firms face a slightly lower rate of 20%. South Korea's case is more nuanced. It's the only country on the list with differentiated tax rates. South Korea's POSCO, one of the world's leading steel producers, proactively approached China and requested an individual review based on its specific export pricing. Following a thorough assessment, China concluded that POSCO's pricing did not cause substantial harm to its domestic industry. As a result, POSCO was given a reduced duty of 23.1%. However, other South Korean companies that didn't request separate evaluations were slapped with a staggering 103.1% tariff. China justified these decisions by presenting evidence that the 30 countries in question had disrupted its market using improper trade practices. Moreover, China emphasized that its global trade position has changed dramatically in recent years. No longer a silent player, it now holds a stronger voice and more robust tools to defend its interests. China made its stance clear. Countries affected by these tariffs can legally request reconsideration or initiate litigation. But while Beijing remains open to dialogue, it will not make concessions on core national interests. The implications of these anti-dumping measures are expected to ripple through Europe's steel supply chain, especially in key economies like Germany. In 2024, Germany's total economic output reached $4.7 trillion, making it the third largest economy in the world. Its strength lies in a powerful industrial system with stainless steel production as one of its cornerstones. Just in November 2023, German steel output hit 2.9 million tons, an 8.6% increase year-on-year. Much of this production is exported to Europe, North America, and Asia-Pacific markets. China, in particular, imported around 120,000 tons of stainless steel from Germany in 2024, accounting for over $600 million in trade. If these anti-dumping duties remain in place, Germany could see its exports to China shrink by more than 25% over time. France, too, will feel the pressure. In 2024, it shipped approximately 50,000 tons of stainless steel to China, with trade volumes exceeding $60 million. Should these exports be officially labeled as dumped goods through EU investigations, French companies could face tariffs of up to 43%, cutting deeply into profits and triggering a domino effect across related industries. But the most dramatic impact is being felt in South Korea, where the top tax rate of 103.1% is almost unheard of. Despite its relatively small land area, South Korea is the world's fifth largest steel producer. The steel industry underpins its shipbuilding and automotive sectors, and POSCO stands at the center of this industrial framework. In earlier years, South Korea's annual steel output hovered near 75 million tons, more than the total combined output of many European countries. Hyundai's steel plant alone boasts a capacity of 24 million tons annually, while POSCO supplies over 26 million tons to clients in more than 60 countries each year. But as China began accelerating its manufacturing transformation, the tide turned. In key product categories such as cast steel, alloy plates, high-strength steel, and specialty metals, where China once relied heavily on imports, domestic capacity is rising rapidly. Chinese products are now catching up to, and in many cases surpassing, Japanese and Korean competitors in both quality and price. This shift has allowed Chinese manufacturers to directly challenge their Korean and Japanese counterparts, capturing valuable market share that was once highly profitable. Since the second half of 2022, South Korea's steel exports have been in decline. In September 2022 alone, export volumes plunged 21.2% year-on-year. Over the following 22 months, aside from a few months of minor recovery, the trend has been consistently negative. However, the harshest blow to South Korea's steel sector didn't come from China, but from the United States. Since the Trump administration introduced a blanket 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports, Korean steelmakers have struggled. For example, in March 2023, South Korea's steel exports to the U.S. were just $340 million, an 18.9% drop from the previous year. Export volume fell to 250,000 tons, marking a 14.9% year-on-year decline. Now with China imposing up to 103.1% anti-dumping duties on stainless steel from Korea, the pressure has intensified. Such high tariffs have effectively shut Korean steel products out of the Chinese market. To illustrate the financial impact, if a South Korean company previously sold 1 ton of stainless steel to China for 15,000 yuan, they'd now have to pay an additional 15,000 yuan in duties, completely erasing any profit. While there's a possibility that China may adjust these tariffs in the future, it's unlikely that South Korea's steel industry will ever regain its former footing in the Chinese market. To stay informed about future developments, industry insights, and global trade updates, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and enable notifications. We'll continue bringing you fresh, in-depth coverage on the topics that matter.